Yo, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, we're going to talk about New Edition's Heartbreak album. This album actually turns 30 years old this year, and we're going to break it down. This album saw New Edition lose a member and gain a member. And we're also going to break down the production and talk about why this album is significant and why New Edition resonates with so many people. So sit back, relax, we'll drop the theme music, and we'll get the podcast jumping. Let's get it. Welcome back. As I mentioned at the top, we're talking about New Edition's Heartbreak album. This album actually turns 30 years old this year. This album was released on June 20th, 1988, which for you and me, this means that we're getting old. Because I actually remember going to the store and copping the cassette tape. I didn't buy the CD, didn't buy a record. I actually bought the cassette tape, A side and B side. So it's really, really bugged out to me that this album is turning 30 years old. As I've mentioned on previous podcasts, I think 1988 is the greatest year in hip hop. R&B was no slouch as well, because this is one of the crowning moments for 1988. A crazy boatload of music and great music that came out, and I'll be talking about it on these podcasts. And this is one of them, man. New Edition's Heartbreak album. I think one of the things that obviously stands out about this album is there's no Bobby. Let me take you back. I can't remember when it was. It might have been somewhere in, late to mid, maybe probably around mid 1987. We got word that Bobby Brown was not going to be a New Edition. And, again, you have to kind of picture it from my perspective, because there was no internet. So, if there was an internet and TMZ, we would have got the full scoop as to why Bobby wasn't in New Edition. And the way that it was explained to the public was that Bobby left the group. We found out years later that that wasn't necessarily the case, but it wasn't uncommon for artists and groups to go solo. And, if you knew New Edition, you knew that, they had some talented members, and that, these guys could go solo. And Bobby was one of the guys that, you knew could and probably would go solo at some point. But I can't remember exactly when they announced it, but it was announced that Bobby was leaving and going solo, and he subsequently released a solo album. And that was the narrative, that Bobby left, to go solo. And that wasn't the case.
Were you voted out, or did you leave on your own?
I was voted out of the group because I would do the opposite, of what they told New Edition to do. I was my own man at a young age, and I just wanted what I wanted. I was still ready to do what I wanted to do and the music that I wanted to do.
Bobby actually got thrown out of the group. So, for him to get thrown out of the group, that spoke volumes. And I think, obviously this was something that we found out years later, but, that spoke volumes as to, where they were. So here it is, Bobby's not in the group. And, New Edition is they're on their own basically, and they're, looking to, sound more grown, if you will. These guys were growing up. They wanted to get away from Popcorn Love and Candy Girl and basically the bubblegum sound, if you will, that they had and they were known for. And so in doing that, they really needed something and someone to help them, kind of take them to that next level. They were tired of the, looking like little kids and everything like that. They wanted to, kind of take on a more mature approach. And, but that was going to be difficult to do because, for one, people loved Bobby Brown, and New Edition fans still love to this day Bobby Brown. I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it right now. I am a huge New Edition fan. My favorite member of the group is Bobby Brown. But so I was really unsure as to what this was going to look like, what it was going to sound like, without Bobby. Particularly when I heard that they were trying to have a more mature sound. I do remember hearing that in an interview. I don't know if it was New Edition or someone from their camp said it on TV or something, or radio or something like that. That they were going for more mature sound and more, a little bit more mature subject matter. And they had some, they had success. They had a lot of success with Bobby. And so, it was going to be interesting to see at this particular time. I think they were in between contracts. I think they had gotten rid of their management and they brought in new management. So this was a season of change, if you will, for New Edition. But again, you're going into the studio to create your fifth studio album, and arguably your most popular member of the group is no longer in the group. And that, that would be that would be cause for concern, I guess. But these guys, they had it in them to, make it happen. And again, people knew that Bobby was going to be missed. Enter in Johnny Gill. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I knew Johnny Gill. I knew him from, the joint he did with Stacey Lattisaw. But that's about it. Like, I didn't know Johnny Gill. I mean, I knew he could sing. I knew he was singing. He was bad. But, to be honest, when I heard that Johnny Gill was in the group, I was like, what does that mean? I mean, like, because automatically as a fan, if you hear that someone else is coming into the group and someone else has left the group, then, you automatically start thinking, okay, well, are they here to replace that person? And to me, you really can't replace Bobby. Bobby is, if you're a New Edition fan, and I've been a fan from day one, Bobby's not somebody that you can replace. So nonetheless, they bring in Johnny Gill. So, like I said, I didn't really know much about Johnny Gill. I knew the song he had with Stacey Lattisaw. I knew he could sing. I didn't know he couldn't dance, but I found that out later. But nonetheless, it was on the outside looking in. It looked kind of, as a fan, I was somewhat skeptical. But, at that particular time, New Edition had taken some time off. So, to be honest, what I do remember about that time is that we were really, really ready for some new music. And this was perfect for me because I was actually in high school at the time. So, this album dropped, I want to say, the summer before my sophomore year in high school. Yeah, I'm older. So yeah, this was dope, man. This was dope. So, enter Johnny Gill. And so here we are. Heartbreak drops, as I mentioned, June 20th, 1998. Now, before we get into the track listing and everything, let me tell you a little bit about the production. The production obviously was done by none other than the great Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Now, really for New Edition to kind of get where they were trying to go, I mean, there was really nobody that was hotter than Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, obviously with their success with, the time, and they were producing all these other acts. And then obviously they scored and crushed it with Janet Jackson. So they weren't like these up and coming producers. They had a foot in the game as far as in the music game, and people knew that they were going to bring out the best in New Edition. And so, we didn't have, at least as far as me as a fan, I didn't have any concerns about that. I was still interested as to how it would look and how it would sound. But all of the production was done by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And this album is, if you count the introduction, this album is 12 tracks. But yeah, it was the production on this album. It has what I call a Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis feel, because they really put a distinct sound on their music. I've heard people describe it as funky. I mean, like, this album is funky. It's R&B. It's got a really deep groove to it. I wouldn't call it New Jack Swing, but it's got even the fast tracks on here have a bounce to them. So, you're going to bump it, wherever you are, and you're going to move your feet, obviously, because it's New Edition. So yeah, it was really good to find out that, New Edition was going to be coming out with an album, and it was going to be produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. I mean, that's a win-win situation. This album obviously took off, rocketed up the charts. I think this album went double platinum. And I mean, they had single after single after single. The videos were dope. People really took to this album, and it really, put New Edition, not that they ever fell off, but it really put them back on the map, I think, as far as where they were in the game. And, people had to take notice as to what New Edition was doing. This album, again, like I said, double platinum. They had hits. They were all over the radio. The first single that they released was "If It Isn't Love," followed by "You're Not My Kind of Girl." Then "Can You Stand the Rain." Those were the first three hits, and I mean, they were smashes. And back in this time in 1988, you really were defined, based on, your record getting airplay on the radio. Radio actually mattered back then, novel concept. But yeah, this album was all over the radio. It was everywhere. And to be honest, Johnny Gill, in my opinion, fit perfectly into what they were doing. So I tell you what, let's take a quick commercial. We'll hear from New Edition and, their thoughts on Johnny Gill. And then on the other side, we'll break down the track listing and talk about why this album is significant. Sit tight. We'll be back in just a second.
Since we, made the transition from a 5-member group to a 4-member group, we had always wanted to go back to 5 members, and we were just waiting for the right time to go back. And since we had to come back this time with the more mature sound, and we were making that drastic change from Boys to Men in everybody else's eyes, we had to bring a more mature sound in the group. So that's what Johnny's basic role was. But Johnny's a fun-loving person. He always has us laughing around. He's a lot like Bobby in a lot of ways. But he's his own person. We don't like to say we want to replace Bob. John's his own person, and we love Johnny for Johnny, and we love Bobby for Bobby.
And just like that, we are back. Once again, it's your boy 12 Kyle, the 12 Kyle podcast, and we're talking about New Edition's Heartbreak album, 30 years later. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the opening, but New Edition actually recorded an album in between the All for Love album and this Heartbreak album. This was an album that did not include Bobby Brown. It was called Under the Blue Moon, but it was actually a cover album where they basically sang other people's songs. You might remember the hit Earth Angel. It was a really good album, but a lot of people tend to kind of overlook that album because it wasn't original New Edition material. However, it was the first album without Bobby Brown. But the one that people were really checking for was this album. That Under the Blue Moon album came out in 86. And then this album obviously comes out in 1988, June 20th, 1988. New Edition Heartbreak album featuring the newest member, Johnny Gill. This album, again, as I mentioned in the intro, like there was a lot of pressure, and I don't know if people really thought that New Edition could pull it off. It was a lot of different things happening and people going in different directions. And again, you bring in Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and it's a totally different sound, from what we were used to with New Edition. But, New Edition fans, they knew what to expect. Well, to be honest, some of them didn't know what to expect. But nonetheless, we really, really were looking forward to this album. The album starts off with a brief introduction, and then they go into track 2. That's The Way We're Living. This is a really good intro track, I think. It's up-tempo, produced by New Edition and Jelly Bean Johnson. I think one of the things I like about this is that it's what I call a really good lead-off song. It's kind of like reintroducing you to New Edition. We hear Johnny singing a little bit on it, so you get an idea as to how he fits in vocally with the group. But I like the song. I think it's a really, really good intro to where the album is going. Then we get into track 3, where it all started. Now, this song I think is very, very interesting because New Edition really was trying to tell people on this song, like, this is where it started. Like, we originated all of this stuff. I think at that particular time, there were other people, Maurice Starr in particular, who was trying to recreate new boy bands and trying to kind of bite off New Edition style. And New Edition basically was saying in this song, like, there's no imitators. You can't duplicate what we have here. We started this and we're going to finish it, and we're New Edition and we're above everybody else. And rightfully so. I mean, like, you couldn't, what New Edition was and what New Edition is and what they've been able to create and manifest over these years couldn't be duplicated. Yeah, there's tons of groups. I mean, we even had New Kids on the Block, for Christ's sake, produced by Maurice Starr as well, the guy who founded New Edition. But nonetheless, you can't duplicate what, these guys created. And that song really was just like saying, like, hey, this is where it started. This is where we're coming from. You can't make another New Edition. So I like that. And that was a little, I don't want to say edgy, because it when you listen to it now, it doesn't sound edgy at all, some 30 years later. But it does, kind of come off as like we're New Edition. And it's kind of brash and, a little bravado. And that's what you wanted. And I think what it did was it just kind of put the stamp on where New Edition was going with this album sonically. Then you get into track 4, If It Isn't Love. What can I say about this song? This is, a lot of people's favorite song on this album. This song is funny because this was the first song that was released from the album. It was released on June 7th, 1998. So the song dropped a couple of weeks before the album came out. And I remember seeing the video for the first time. Shout out to BET, Video Soul. I saw it that summer, Video Soul. I think Donnie Simpson premiered it on his show. But yeah, man, it was so funny just to see it. And you know how, I mean, like, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm pretty sure you've seen the video 1,000 times. But the beginning is just so funny. And like, after that, I'm just like, okay, on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what these guys are going to do. And then they start off into this dance routine. And it's really interesting because if you're a New Edition fan, if you saw the New Edition movie, you know that New Edition, it's still the same dance moves. When this song comes on, anybody that's an NE fan still knows the dance move because the dance move haven't changed in 30 years. They're still doing the same moves. And guess what? It's still dope. So yeah, it's incredible, man. I love this song. Again, it's a New Edition staple, if you will. You ask anybody who what some of their favorite New Edition songs, almost everybody's going to name this song, at least as far as one of their favorite songs. So yeah, I love it. Love the video. this is one of the New Edition songs. I think, just on a personal note, I think just really, really, like, I never get tired of hearing it. Then you go to track 5, N.E. Heartbreak. N.E. Heartbreak was cold, man. This is a cold track, especially for the time, because it was kind of, it was real funky. It had, a little bit of that Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis sound, if you will. But, it was crazy. And so that song comes out, and then the remix, there's nothing else to say about the remix other than don't forget the pumps. It doesn't get any better than don't forget the pumps, because you need the pumps. So this was, and what's interesting about this entire album is that there were a couple of tracks, Any Heartbreak being one, that, had a dope original song, and then the remix was dope as well. So it was just like, you were winning either way. And Any Heartbreak, man, is just so cold. And I love watching the video for this song for the remix, because, I love Johnny Gill to death, man, but Johnny is really struggling trying to dance in this video. But he's gotten better over the years. And again, but people that know Johnny Gill, like, he's not known for necessarily being able to move. But I will say, since being in New Edition, his dancing has gotten better. But yeah, Any Heartbreak, another crazy, crazy classic New Edition song. It's a banger. Once again, one that you never get tired of hearing about. Then the next track 6, Crucial, which also had a remix. Crucial is the jam. Again, and Ralph really does his thing. They all do, but Ralph really stands out in this track. Another favorite, man. This song, it still goes to this day, and still hard. And depending on who you ask, a cross section of people, some people like the original better, some people like the remix, but nonetheless, a dope song in and of itself. And then track 7, You're Not My Kind of Girl, which was actually I want to say that was the second song that they released. They released this track on September 6th in 1998. Excuse me, 1988. I don't know why I said 98. In 1988. You're Not My Kind of Girl. The title basically explains itself. Again, New Edition, they're really just hitting you back to back to back with these jams. And these are bangers, and these are New Edition staples. I will say this much. If you're listening to this podcast and you have not seen New Edition live, do yourself a favor. I don't care how much it costs. Go see New Edition live, because they, even to this day, some 30 years later after this album is dropped, they continuously do a dope ass show that you don't want to miss. I've seen them in concert, I want to say twice. I plan to see them again. But yeah, they're cold, man. Just a cold routine. The routines, everything is impeccable. They're always dressed to the T. Depending on if Bobby's performing, Bobby might get a little winded, but it's okay. He's Bobby, So make sure that you check them out. But You're Not My Kind of Girl, another banger. Love that track. Then you get to track 8. Now, track 8 is actually interesting for me, just on a personal note, because in the track 8 is called Super Lady. I remember buying the cassette tape, right? And for some reason, and I don't understand why, because I guess this would have been the start of the B-side. Shout out to the B-side. You don't have A-sides and B-sides anymore, because quite frankly, nobody buys tapes anymore. But Super Lady, for some reason, on my tape did not exist. I don't know why to this day. So it wasn't until years later when I actually bought the CD that Super Lady was on. And again, before you guys accuse me, I did not have a bootleg tape. It was the legitimate tape. For some reason, Super Lady wasn't on my tape. And I don't know if it was something, maybe somebody will tell me if it was something that was re-released or something, but for whatever reason, Super Lady wasn't on the original tape that I bought. So I came to learn and love that song later on. But they slow it down a little bit here, and then you start getting into the ballads. And then you get to track 9, Can You Stand the Rain? There's really a lot that I could say about this track, but most of what I'm going to say about it, you already know. This is, in my opinion, the best song on the album. This is one of the best songs I think that New Edition has ever made. Just my personal opinion. This is a song that I never grow tired of hearing, and I think, Johnny leads off perfectly, and Ralph does his thing as well. I love it. I don't know. There's so much I can say about it. I will say this much: if you have, shout out to everybody out there who had who made the little slow jams, get the draws mixtapes. If you made a slow jams, get the draws mixtape, and this wasn't on your tape, then you really didn't have a tape. That's the best I could say, because every slow jams, get the draws mixtape that I ever made, whether or not it was a tape or a CD, Can You Stand the Rain is on there. I mean, like, all you want to do, fellas, is make a tape and be able to sing this to a young lady. Even if you can't sing, you can hum along. But yeah, I love this song to death, man. This is the quintessential New Edition song. And honestly, just on a personal note, I think this is one of the songs that really, kind of helped define their legacy. And, the song lives forever. It'll forever. There's never a time where I'll get tired of playing this song. And I think this was the third track that was released from the album. And it's a certified banger, a all-time classic. If you have not heard the song, if you have not seen the video, I don't know how that is possible at this point, but if so, after you finish listening to this podcast, do yourself a favor and check it out. And then the next track that they go into is track 10, Competition. First and foremost, I think this is a great song. But this song, one line in particular stands out. Ralph sings, competing with your friends, will it ever end? I'm losing all of my patience. I need a way out. I think that was very key because obviously in 1988, people wanted New Edition to be going at and going against Bobby Brown. And I think, judging just from how things kind of played out, the guys in the group really still love Bobby Brown at that particular time. While they weren't necessarily in competition with him, they were. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, both this Heartbreak album and the Bobby Brown's second album, Don't Be Cruel, they both dropped on the same day. So, there was going to be competition, but I think there was a sentiment in that lyric, in that song, that people, wanted New Edition to hate Bobby Brown. They don't hate Bobby Brown. I guess from a fan's perspective, I think the guys in the group, because Bobby's been in and out of the group as far as how they've been touring here over these last few years or whatever like that. I think there's a genuine love for the guy, and I think they genuinely feel like brothers. And then they also recognize that Bobby has, some shortcomings, and they don't necessarily judge him for that. They love him anyway, and how they make it work, it's really not for public consumption and for people to try to dissect and figure out how and why New Edition has worked with Bobby Brown and without Bobby Brown. But nonetheless, I think the guys in the group really, really love him, and they, and they care about him. As far as the competition aspect of it, Don't Be Cruel did much, much better than this Heartbreak album did, but this Heartbreak album was a killer, and Don't Be Cruel just went through the roof. So, they both won, but this is a dope track, and it still resonates to this day. And then the next track that they get into is track 10. Actually, before the track starts, there's an interlude of Mike actually making a phone call home to his girlfriend. And he's calling, with enthusiasm and telling her that, hey, I'm coming home off the tour. And the song I'm Coming Home is really about them coming off tour, being away from their family and friends and loved ones, and then just celebrating coming home. This one, I love this song, man. This song got a lot of play in my tape deck, to be honest. And even once I bought the CD, man, I played it relentlessly because it's a really, really feel good song. But because of the time in 1988, there was no, cameras or anything like that could show us, or any reality shows that could show us their life away from the stage, and how they were, living, and how they could interact with each other, and how they missed, the ones that they left back at home. So I thought this song was perfect, man. And it gives you a really, really good visual as to how they lived and their feelings about, coming home. And then the last track 12, was Boys to Men. Now, the only person that appears on this song is Johnny Gill. And I remember hearing Johnny Gill some years ago in an interview say that, he knew his role coming into New Edition, and he wanted an opportunity to, express himself, but he wasn't sure how many songs he was going to sing on, and so forth and so on. And when they gave him the opportunity to just sing Boys to Men, he was like, well, if this is what they're going to give me, I'm going to tear it up. And that's exactly what he did. This is classic Johnny Gill, man. If you're a fan of Johnny Gill, you know that this is how he really gets down all the time. But I love this song, man. It's a perfect closeout to the album. And that's it. It's with the introduction, it's 12 tracks. This album is an extremely easy listen. It's only almost 52 minutes. So it's perfect. If you haven't listened to this album ever, make sure that you listen to it after this podcast. Now, I will say that this album is extremely significant for a couple of reasons. One, it really helped introduce us to the grown New Edition. They weren't singing about Candy Girl or Popcorn Love or Mr. Telephone Man or anything like that. They were talking about love and relationships and just being able to stand on their own as men, and they were coming into their own. So, and even their look, if you look at the videos, they look like young men as opposed to, singing about the stuff that they were singing about, trying to look like little kids. But I think that's one of the things that made this album, as significant as it was. This album anchored, some of the albums that came out in 1988 as far as R&B. New Edition, it like I said, it really put them back on the map. Because I'll be honest, there's a lot of people that thought that when Bobby left the group, that they were gonna, tank. And because we've seen it happen before in R&B before. And so, there was a lot of speculation as to how successful this album could be. There was some speculation as to how successful they would be working with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. So they put all of that aside and put that to bed very quickly as soon as you heard that album, because the album was crazy. This album, I think, is the best album in their discography. I think "Can You Stand the Rain" is their best song in their discography. You could make a case for some others, but I think it's I think it's the best. It's obviously my favorite, so I'm a little biased. I'll admit that. But that's another reason why this is so significant. And then obviously this album has helped, as far as the longevity. And this album, whether or not people wanted to admit it or not, but it went head to head with Bobby Brown's "Don't Be Cruel." Now I mentioned, they didn't do the sales that Bobby did, but I think what it showed was that they could really, really stand on their own 2 feet without Bobby. And then also, Bobby's success with "Don't Be Cruel" showed that he could, stand on his own without New Edition. And even though it was his second album, the first album didn't do as well for Bobby. So, he really, really kind of took it to the next level. So I think the separation at that particular time worked for both. Now, as many of you know, New Edition dropped in 2017 their biopic on BET. That, I think it was like 28 million people went to BET and watched that. It was a 3-part series, 3 nights. Personally, I thought it was phenomenal. And I will give BET props when I normally don't give BET props. But I thought it was phenomenal. And I think what that series did was, you know, it helped solidify the music that they made, but it also introduced New Edition to a new generation of people, particularly kids. I know just on a personal level, my kids have seen that New Edition movie at least 10 times. Like, I've seen it like twice, but they've seen it at least 10 times. And what it did was it brought a newfound respect and love for their music. And so, you know, when I'm walking around my house and I'm hearing my kids singing Mr. Telephone Man, or they're singing Popcorn Love, or If It Isn't Love, and they know the moves and everything, like they really gravitated towards this music. And not just my kids, but, you know, their classmates and their friends. So there's a generation of kids who weren't even born when this album came out in '88, who have a distinct, you know, appreciation for it. And it's because of that documentary. As far as New Edition, man, I will always love this group. If you're listening or you're new to the podcast, I did a podcast on the Home Again album, which came out in 1996. Make sure that you check that one out as well. That's the only album that they've done where all 6 members are together. I did a podcast on that one as well, so check that out. But this album is incredible, man. It is one of the staples of 1988. Why do I keep saying 98? One of the staples of 1988 is a phenomenal album. If you haven't heard it, listen to it. If you haven't heard it in a while, listen to it again, and you'll appreciate just how dope it is. That's going to do it for me. Once again, thank you for listening, downloading, listening, and subscribing to this podcast. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's.